What's up guys, and welcome back to another video on this channel. We're finally back with the Volvo 740. I know it's been a long time coming, but it's finally appearing now again on the channel. I've actually been using this car as a daily driver during the winter, and it worked absolutely beautifully, except for a broken alternator that I replaced with a new one. I also went ahead and replaced the dampers in the front, and also lowered it a little bit more in the front because it was sitting very high in the front comparing to the rear. Yeah, it's been sitting now for a couple of months. Haven't been driving it during the spring, but today is finally the day that we're gonna start working on it again. I'm gonna be changing out all the belts. I have a couple of accessory belts right here, a complete timing belt kit along with a water pump. I'm gonna change the coolant and replace the oil as well. So let's get to it. But before we start, let's just go ahead and give it a quick clean. Now this video isn't mainly meant as a perfect how-to guide on how to replace a timing belt on the Volvo red block engines. If you want to check out more materials on that, I'm actually linking down in the description a couple of good guides on how to replace the timing belt on these old Volvo engines. So if you want more information about that, feel free to check them out. With that being said, this video still includes pretty much all of the steps necessary, so I still think it can be used as a good reference on how to do this job. Also, I'm not gonna do as much commentary that I usually do because most of the footage is pretty self-explanatory, but I'll share some useful tips along the way. So I got it up on the lift just so I can work in more comfortable positions. But anyways, yeah, let's get right to it and start to removing stuff, starting with the accessory belts. The adjusting screws on the alternator and the power steering pump. If you turn it clockwise, you tighten the belt, and if you turn it anti-clockwise, you loosen up the belt. And once I fast forward the footage, you can actually see how the belt starts to come loose. All of the belts were really old and cracks started to form on pretty much all of them, and they still had the Volvo original writing on them, which makes me think that the last time they were changed was a long time ago at the Volvo dealership. Now the old water pump didn't have any play in the axle, which is pretty common with old pumps. However, it was heavily oxidized and it actually started to leak a little bit, so it definitely was due for replacement. Now the last documentation on when the timing belt was changed was in the year 2000. So considering that the belt is 21 years old, it's actually in surprisingly good condition, and it would probably last a couple of more years. However, the tensioner was what really concerned me because it was really dry and you can see these rust flakes starting to come off it, and it had some play in it. And usually that is what kills timing belts in my experience. It's usually an idler pulley, tensioner, or the water pump if it's driven by the timing belt. Here you can see me squeezing the tensioner spring in order to get the timing belt off. The inside of the hose was badly pitted and damaged by the corrosion, so I decided to just buy a new one. There's a total of 6 fasteners holding on the water pump to the block, 2 nuts on 2 studs, and then 3 regular screws and 1 through bolt with a nut on the other side holding on the water pipe. These old water pumps can sometimes be really stuck to the block. If you're gonna pry them out, make sure not to pry on the sealing surface. It's really important to make sure that the sealing surface is clean from any old gasket material and loose rust, so you have a perfectly clean, flat surface to mount the water pump on. I'm gonna use a combination of some very fine wet sanding paper and a flat blade scraper. Just make sure you're careful and don't use the corner of the scraper. Other than that, you're perfectly fine to use this method. Now, watching at the edited material, it may not seem like this took a very long time, but this was probably the most time-consuming part of the entire job, just because it's really important to make sure that you have a good surface to mount the new water pump on. Otherwise, it's just gonna leak. It doesn't have to be a mirror shine finish, but just make sure that it feels flat and clean with your fingers. Now, I was actually not planning to replace all of the seals in the front of the engine first, but while I'm in here, I just can't resist it. So I'm gonna replace the camshaft seal, the intermediate shaft seal, and the crankshaft seal. For some reason, the cam seal was really stubborn, but eventually I managed to get it off. And of course I cleaned and protect all of the plastic panels that I removed. Before I go ahead and mount the new water pump, I need to prep it. And the first thing I need to do there is transfer the old studs from the old water pump to the new one. Some cheaper brands of water pumps comes with a gasket that just has regular holes for the elongated holes on the water pump, but this one already came pre-cut with elongated holes on the gasket itself. I'm applying some gasket maker on the water pump side and then fitting the gasket onto that and then letting it harden. That way it will be 10 times easier to mount the water pump on the block without fiddling around with the gasket. While the gasket is drying up, I'm using the water pump's own weight on a flat surface to ensure that the gasket maker is evenly distributed. Make sure to carefully and evenly reinstall your new water pump in order not to damage your new seal. It's practically impossible to compress the upper seal just with hand strength in order to get the fasteners in. You need to do that in order for the water pump to seal. That's just how the design is. So I'm actually using a jack and a piece of wood to carefully press up the upper seal in order to get the fasteners in. Before final assembly of the timing belt, I'm removing the number 1 spark plug and then putting in a screwdriver there, just to make sure that the timing marks are correct and that the piston in fact is at top dead center. The tensioner is self-adjusting, so just loosen up the nut, let it create some tension, and then retighten the nut. I actually ended up putting in over 6 liters of fresh new coolant in the system, which is like 80% of the total capacity, so that's perfectly good enough for me. Before I reinstall the rest of the components, it's finally time for a test start. It's really important to do a thorough inspection and to double check all of your work after doing an involved job like this. No leaks were found and the engine ran perfectly, or at least it ran as it did before. Before wrapping things up, it's time to replace the winter tires with my BBS summer wheels. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. It sure feels nice to me knowing that I have new maintenance parts installed on the Volvo. See you in the next video. Until then, have a great one, guys.